approach every game I cover giving it a fair shot. Regardless of its history, I try to see the good and the bad of a game, giving as much information as possible so that whomever is watching can determine whether or not they want to try the game I'm talking about. Recently, a game came out that a lot of MMO content creators are covering, and almost every one of them has panned it for a bevy of reasons. The Quinfall is that game. Published and developed by Vagrant Technology Incorporated, the Quinfall is a buy-to-play sandbox MMORPG that has taken quite a lot of inspiration from Korean MMORPGs like ArcheAge, Black Desert Online, and the recent Throne and Liberty. Released in January 2025 in early access at a cost of $20, the Quinfall has garnered overwhelmingly negative feedback upon its release, with the first week of the game being nearly unplayable due to the sheer amount of issues the game had. Players experienced things like connection issues, tons of lag, NPCs missing, quests not working, loot drops not working, and more. But now that the game is about a month old or so with some of those frustrations being addressed, does the game still deserve its overwhelming negativity? Well, I paid my 20 bucks, installed the game, and gave it an honest shot. So what do I have to say about the Quinfall? So the story of Quinfall is a bit long-winded, but I'll try to give it a quick summary. Essentially, there is this creator god named Eonisar. The god creates all of these planets, including the namesake of the game, Quinfall. Suddenly, these portals start showing up for some reason, filled with monsters that start attacking. So Eonisar creates another god to help protect Quinfall, named Tyrion. Tyrion apparently creates humanity, and they go and fight those monsters in a long war, and when the war is over, those people he created goes and lives their lives, establishing the people of Quinfall. Then Tyrion dies for some reason, and then the monsters return, for once again, some unexplainable reason. So adventurers take up the mantle and fight against these monsters, with you being one of those adventurers. The story is fine for what it is. I mean, stories in MMORPGs typically are never so incredibly gripping, it has me on the edge of my seat, so it's not really a big deal. Quinfalls, though, has this blatant feeling of AI, and as you can probably see from the beginning intro cutscene, the art here is also AI generated. At least the intro is voice acted, which is a nice touch, even if you can tell that English is not their first language. Before the intro cutscene is played, though, you have character creation. Character creation in Quinfall is actually surprisingly detailed to an extent, with various sliders, color choices, body shapes, and your character's voice, which is AI generated, I'm pretty sure. Once you select how your character looks, if you are male or female, and their name, you spawn into the world of Quinfall. The graphics are actually pretty good, at least better than most indie MMOs on the market for comparison. I wish I could say the same for music and sound effects though, as I'm fairly certain it's all just stock Unity sound effects and songs. For instance, the tutorial song that plays was also one of the main themes in Arcfall, another game that was built with stock Unity assets and strangely has a similar name. This is a pretty common thing that indie MMO developers do though, so it's not entirely a negative. Getting back to the tutorial, it teaches you all the basics you need to know, including movements, combat, your menus, etc. It's simple and straightforward, but it works. Also, when you complete the tutorial, I find it funny that it copies the spanning wide shot title card that a lot of other games do once you get out into the open. Once that's done, you choose a couple of character perks, and then you start in the first city. From here, you are introduced to the game's main features, like exploration, questing, professions, social features, progression, achievements, all the stuff you'd expect in a fully released MMO. So it's actually kind of impressive to see how many features there are here. Let's go more in depth with things, starting with the game's combat. Combat is an action-based system, where left-clicking is your light attack and right-clicking is your heavy attack. You can perform various abilities and spells via your hotbar down below based on your weapon choice, similar to Throne in Liberty. In fact, your weapon choice actually determines how you engage in combat, since the game doesn't actually have any traditional class choices. Each weapon instead has its own skill kits, basically meaning that the weapon you wear basically determines your class. Now, in general, the mechanics here have the bones for a pretty solid combat system, but with how movement and combat currently feel, it's just really janky, especially as a ranged weapon user. Enemies tend to be all blobbed together in packs, with most weapons being able to hit multiple enemies normally. Ranged weapons, however, tend to only hit one enemy at a time, so as you can imagine, most of the time you are firing arrows or spells, you are doing so from within melee range after you begin attacking. Melee combat is much better, but when you fight enemies that have mechanics that require movement, you'll find that dodging, running, and moving in general is a little clunky. Overall, the combat functions as it is, and it does feel better as a ranged class once you are in a party, but it could definitely use some fine-tuning. As you level, you'll have more and more skills to play with, so leveling does improve combat a bit further, since you'll be able to do more than just spam your light attacks. Progression has a few different systems in place. First is your character's level. Each level up grants a small boost to your health and mana, and overall determines what equipment you can wear. Gear functions as you would expect, having different level requirements, rarities, enchantments, as well as having separate armor types, depending on what build you are going for, like heavy, leather, and cloth. Weapons each have their own separate mastery levels that grant you 1 skill point per level. These skill points can be used to learn new abilities or level up current ones. Leveling up a skill does require skill books to do so, which can be dropped from enemies you defeat or be purchased from other players. Skills can be further augmented via skill stones that grant a small boost in stats for that skill, like extra crit rate, damage, or stun effects. As you play, pretty much everything you do grants small amounts of experience towards leveling you up. Questing is one of the main ways you'll level up in the beginning, with the game having a main story quest that it pushes you towards, similar to other MMOs. The quests are pretty much the common standard of killing a certain amount of enemies, fetching items, and talking to specific people within the game, with there even being a quest board that you can pick up randomized quests from, similar to New World. There is actually quite a lot of professions in the Quinfall. You have all the basics like mining, gathering, woodcutting, but other ones that aren't normally in MMOs, like farming, animal husbandry, and treasure hunting. It's a shame that crafting is a bit tedious though, considering it requires a lot of materials to craft anything of note, but it does seem rewarding for players who spend time leveling their professions. In general, the Quinfall has a lot more systems than I thought it would. Hell, they even have player-owned boats, just like Arcage had, with the ability to transport goods overseas or be a pirate and steal goods from other boats. The map is massive, with there being multiple continents to explore. Instance dungeons you can run either solo or with a party. Open world bosses that spawn on scheduled timers. Rotating PvP events that you can matchmake into, as well as open world PvP servers. Open world PvE events called Rifts. A functioning auction house. Pets, mounts, taming, player clans, player-owned housing, leaderboards. It's quite a lot. Like I said, it's impressive how much is here for the game being in early access. The biggest strike against the Quinfall, however, is just how the company has presented themselves and the game. First off, the developers have a bit of a checkered past, where they abandoned another MMO project they worked on relatively quickly after its launch. It's hard to believe that they will will continue development on this game if it starts to fail, since they've abandoned another MMO before because it was failing. They've also just done some weird stuff like photoshopped their logo on this stock company background image, as well as a few other things that you can find on YouTube that other content creators have covered. Besides just weird and shady things with the company, it's the game itself. Obviously, there is the AI generated stuff like some of the art, the voice acting, story, and possibly the map itself, but most players can probably look past that. The major issues seep in when you start looking at things like the game client and the monetization. The game client has quite a lot of problems with players cheating, hacking, and generally exploiting. There wasn't any sort of anti-cheat in place when they launched the game, but thankfully the game does now use anti-cheat. However, that doesn't change the fact that players already cheated before that was set in place. You can find examples of hacking on YouTube where players spawn enemies for easy farming, they change their speed, turn on God mode, and so on. It makes the game look bad when you can easily find cheats and exploits on YouTube for it. Then you have the game's monetization. So the game has an upfront cost of $20. To some people that's going to be a huge turnoff, but if the game is fun, then I say it's worth it. But the cash shop is a major red flag. So the cash shop has all the normal stuff like cosmetics, pets, mounts, convenience items, and more, with the support packages basically being this game's subscription service, where you can buy increased XP rates that last 15 to 30 days. That's all fine, maybe a bit pay to win, but it's nothing we don't normally see in MMORPGs nowadays. The problem is the cash shop's premium items that are being sold to players that are just Unity store assets purchased by the developers and then resold back to players. Now, it's not uncommon for developers to use asset packs within Unity as placeholders for developments within the game. That I have no issue with. Where I have a problem is when those Unity assets are just sold to players. The developers have stated that they used placeholders in a lot of areas of the game, but selling them on the cash shop to players is just another level of wrong, and honestly, it's just scummy. If you don't believe me, watch Lazy Peon's developer interview with the Quinfall's developers. He does a great job on pointing out a lot of these oddities. Ultimately, if the developers were just upfront about certain things they were doing and removed selling Unity store assets from the cash shop, I think players would be more willing to look past the game's shortcomings. No one is really going to care if you use pre-made models and assets if you are a passionate team of developers who want to make a great game. People will resonate with that. What people won't put up with is shady business practices. Of course, no one really knows if this company is being malicious with what they are doing here though. For all we know, they could just be a new company trying their hardest to make a game people want to play and are just inexperienced managing an MMO. But at worst, they are making a game they are going to shut down as soon as it stops seeing revenue come in. The Quinfall is definitely playable, so I can't really say it's a scam. It's got a lot of features that make for a great foundation, but it's really hard to recommend the game to anyone when seeing some of the red flags. I think at this point, it's time to get to my final thoughts. The Quinfall has quite a lot of features and content for a game that recently launched into early access. I was really impressed with it. Looking at professions, PvE content, PvP content, quality of life features like fast travel or auto travel, there's things here that you normally don't see in indie MMOs, and I have to give props for that. Speaking of the content in the game, there is a nominal amount of PvE and PvP content for players to jump into. So for my PvP players out there, you won't feel left out here. The game has relatively decent graphics. You can make the game look pretty darn good if you max out the game's specifications. Some of the game's textures and such will still look a bit off, and it's not like you'll see specific details in the environments like footprints or anything, but it's decent to look at. And finally, if you like a more modern spin on MMOs, the Quinfall has a lot of systems from those modern games. Most indie MMORPGs are based on classic retro games within the genre, while the Quinfall seems to be taking designs from popular Korean MMOs. So if that's your thing, you'll probably like what Quinfall has to offer, if you can get past some of the jankiness of the game, which leads into the negatives. Since the game is in early access, expect to run into bugs and glitches. In the time I played the Quinfall, I ran into quite a lot of general oddities that ranged from funny to incredibly frustrating. Even though the game has a relatively low buy-in cost of only $20, some may want to try the game before they buy into it, and sadly, the Quinfall does not have any sort of free trial that allows you to do so. Realistically, I suppose you could just watch a video like this and get an idea of the game, but having some sort of free trial would also go a long way in my opinion. The game has quite a lot of placeholder items and assets, almost to the point where it can be seen as an asset flip. Obviously, the developers have stated that they are going to flesh out the game as it's developed, and most players probably won't care. It's still worth mentioning that a lot of the game's models and assets are just purchased from the Unity store. Now for the most damning point here. With various information that has been brought to light about the game developer, as well as their various management choices, the game has a relatively questionable future. Ultimately, will the developer be able to avoid a sinking ship by righting their wrongs, or will they abandon the game once it starts to sink? It sucks to see a game come out like this that has so much baggage. I try to be a positive person, so I'm hoping for the player base that the developers continue to listen to feedback and learn from their mistakes. If they do so, then the Quinfall could become that underdog MMO that started things off rocky but built a solid player base. But as with a lot of these early access titles, only time will tell. Anyways, have you played the Quinfall? Comment below and let me know. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to support my content. Follow all my social media in the description below, and I hope to see you all next time.